Hi everyone, I'm Caitlin Sullivan with Society for Science in the Public. Welcome to our science education series at virtual Regeneron ISEF. We're so glad that you are able to join us today. This symposium is about supporting rural and Native students in science education, in STEM research projects and competitions. Joining me today are two of our experienced research teachers who are part of our advocate program. The advocate program supports teachers who want to expand their capacity to support underserved students in doing STEM research projects and entering competitions. So we encourage you to look into this program, and we are so glad that they are here today to share their advice and expertise on how they have supported their students over the years. So I'm going to turn to them now and ask each of them to introduce themselves. Emily, let's start with you.
I'll start. I'm Debbie Morgan, and I've been teaching science students for the past 18 years, and I'm in a rural area, so that's why I'm here. I teach in just a fairly small school, about 400 students in the middle of Utah. So I teach chemistry, science, physics, and investigation science.
Thank you, Debbie. And of course, Debbie, not Emily. Emily is our co-leader of the advocate program. All right, Cheyenne, let's go to you.
I'm Cheyenne. I teach in Oklahoma. I'm actually a former classroom teacher. I now run a nonprofit that focuses on getting the disenfranchised and underserved students in Oklahoma to be involved in GIS and geography education. So we focus especially on recruiting Native students and students in rural areas.
All right, thank you both. All right, let's get started with a few questions that I have for you. Our first question, I'd just like for you to tell us a little bit about the setting that you're in and the students that you work with. Cheyenne, why don't you start us off by telling us about your students?
Yeah, so the students that we work with our nonprofit, we work in several different towns in Oklahoma. And two of those are extremely rural to the point that they are not even on Apple Maps. So if you're trying to get there, it's going to be a little difficult using your cell phone. And as far as Native populations, we typically stay at about half of our students in the DO team are Native, primarily Potawatomi, Sac and Fox, and absentee Shawnee.
Okay, and Cheyenne, do your students typically have a lot of experience with STEM coming into your program?
No, so sometimes they have never really experienced a true lab setting. Oftentimes they live in areas where there's a constant revolving door with science teachers. So usually the science teachers don't even have time to unpack before they move on to a different location.
Okay, thank you. All right, and Debbie, why don't you tell us a little bit about your setting and the students you support?
So as I mentioned, we're about 400 students, but about 10%, so about 40 of those students are actually Native students coming from the Navajo Reservation south of us. And we're unique in the fact that we still offer a residential facility. And so these students actually move away from their family and friends for the school year and spend the time with us. So it's a unique situation where we get to build relationships with kids that oftentimes aren't even from our state or area. We house them in a campus that's about 15 minutes away from our school, and the students actually get to split into two different high schools.
Okay, thank you. All right, next question. What motivates your students to participate in STEM research projects and competitions? Debbie, let's start with you.
safe opportunities for them. Oh, thank you. I thought I unmuted it. So the biggest motivation to get my students participating in research is it's providing opportunities for them to explore interests and things that they've never had opportunity to think about before. And I think that's kind of the biggest draw is I'm able to expose them to topics and careers and maybe ideas in science that they never thought that they'd have the opportunity to think about or to explore more. And getting them involved in the program, the best way for me to do that is just to personally invite them, is to track them down. And since we are a rural school, it's easier to do that. I know all of my kids, I know all of my students, and so to personally invite them to join in on our STEM club or to take the investigation science class allows me to build those relationships and work one-on-one with them. And that's a huge motivation for them, to know that there's an adult who is interested in them and cares about them and wants them to succeed.
Yeah, I think that makes a huge difference, and we've seen that in the advocate program. Cheyenne, how about you? What motivates your students?
So my background is in coaching, and I really emphasize the team aspect. And for a lot of my students, it's either join the basketball team or there's nothing else. And so this is that something else. And it's not just science fair. It's not just an individual project. You know, we're a team, and they get to have that feeling of belonging.
Yeah, I think it's so important. I think for a lot of our students, and I'm a former teacher, what they see their friends doing, they will do as well. And so that can be really powerful, you know, if you can get more than one student involved. If one kid is there after school, then they all kind of meander in that direction. Oh, sorry, I apologize. I was on mute. What are some of the advantages that rural students or Native students have, or what are some of the advantages you have in working in those settings? Sorry, Cheyenne, what are your thoughts?
So Debbie kind of hinted at this earlier. There's really nothing closer than a rural and a Native community. You know, you can count on a rural community to come together. If my students need something, the parents are ready. If I need like a helping hand, if we're working on a project, you can bet that I'm going to have 5 parents that are ready to step up and help me. And especially within the Native community, you know, I can go to tribes and I can say, hey, you know, we need sea perch kits or we need something else. And if they don't have it, they're probably going to try to get it because they want to make sure that their students, that our tribal students, have those resources and have every advantage that they can get to try to succeed.
And Debbie, how about you?
Yeah, same here. The community is hugely supportive for that, and I think that is a huge advantage for working in a rural community. But also, to me, there isn't a huge competition for space or resources relating to science in a rural area. And so if you're willing to put in the effort and go out there and communicate that to community leaders and to your faculty, your administration, they're oftentimes willing to support that and want to encourage, you know, growth of STEM programs in any way possible. Plus, there's a lot of amazing grants and opportunities out there that are specific to rural and Native communities, just like Science for Society and the Public and the Advocate program. So many programs out there that are willing to support if you're willing to do the legwork to figure out what those programs are and to apply for them.
Yeah, I want to mention that with our programs, we're not looking for folks who are experts in writing grant applications. We're not looking for teachers who, you know, already have everything together and know everything they need to know. We're looking for teachers who want to grow and have that potential for growth. I wanted to ask a follow-up question because Cheyenne had mentioned parents. Do those of you find that in your communities that teachers are respected and parents feel that you are the one who is leading the students, or are they actively involved in helping the students with these research projects and competitions? Debbie, let's start with you.
I think like in any educational setting, you're going to have a mix. You're going to have a mix of parental support. You often have lower income population that you're working with, and because of that, there's a lot of stressors for parents and their families, and so there isn't always the ability to support in ways that they would like to, and so you oftentimes do have to take on that role as a mentor for your students to kind of help support them and help parents in that respect, because they don't always have the time, money, or resources to be that support that they really want to be, but just because of circumstances they can't always. But in kind of conversely to that is they're still super supportive in ways that they know how to be and can be, with that respect.
Okay, thank you. Cheyenne, how do you stay in contact with parents? How do they know what's going on with your team?
So I try to use every means possible. I will send notes home. I constantly use Remind, and I am completely willing to update anytime parents' numbers change. I've also recently started making videos and posting them on YouTube so that they can rewatch them, or if the messages don't make sense, then they can go back and look at the 10-minute video as I'm explaining things.
That's a great idea. I hadn't thought of that. And of course, Remind is a tool that you can use, I believe, to text your students. Is that right? So you can text your students. I've heard a lot of advocates use that in order to send their students reminders about projects. So that's a really useful tool, especially if it's over a holiday break and you want to make sure your students are still working on their projects. Okay, the next question we have, what are the unique needs of the students you work with that may be different from students in urban areas or from other cultures? Cheyenne, let's start with you.
It's honestly, it seems kind of strange, but just getting supplies in this day and age, you would think you can just run and go grab something from the store. But if you're an hour from the nearest Walmart, if you need something specific, especially science specific, Walmart doesn't always carry that. So even if you have a parent willing to drive that hour, you're not always going to be able to go grab that supply really quickly. And, that can get frustrating, especially right now as the students are trapped at home. They don't have those supplies. And, I think that students that are in urban areas, they don't have that same hill to get over.
Yeah, I think that's true. Debbie, how about you? What are some of the unique needs of your students that might be different from others?
Yeah, as I mentioned, a lot of our students are coming to live in a residential hall, and they're coming out of a community where they feel safe and protected and loved, and they have their tradition and their culture, and they know that. And then they're coming up to this residential hall, and within the residential hall, they do such great work to really love and support the kids and build that culture within there as well. But then they come into the public school setting, and it's very different from anything that they've experienced this far in their life, and for most of them. And so they can often be shy and reserved and want to just kind of fade into the background and not be noticed, not make notice for themselves. And so I've found that because of that separation, they often have a difficult time communicating or expressing themselves, and it's really up to us as as teachers and advocates for them to help establish those relationships, to get them to recognize that we're on their side and we're here for them, and to really build that trust. That's a lot oftentimes, and that goes for any student that you're working with. Like, you have to build that trust and that relationship first, and then once you can do that, then you start to see them come out and express themselves and communicate more effectively, so that you recognize, like, what are their needs, what are their interests, what do they want to study, and that really helps overcome those barriers that are often there at the beginning of the year when you first meet these students.
Yeah, I can see how that might be intimidating for some students to come into that environment. One of you mentioned, Cheyenne, I think you mentioned some of these other stressors that are on students, or Debbie was mentioning some students in rural areas also come from families that are low income. Do you find that many of your students have jobs or responsibilities that also pull on their time, and how do you keep them engaged then in your program? Debbie, how about you?
That's definitely one of the biggest issues for my students, is really just having outside responsibilities or things that they have to do after school, and the fact that they ride buses, right? So if they're on a bus for a half hour before and after school, or even longer sometimes, then that takes a lot of time out of the day, and they're not able to stay after school for after school programs. And so with that, the way I've kind of gotten around that is to teach an investigation science class, so that independent research can take place during the school day. And that's always the best case scenario, to be able to have a class like that. But even like this year, with all of the struggles that are going to be kind of coming down economically within our schools, that funding is going to be maybe taken away, we've been told. And so to get creative with my students, I often have to meet with them individually at the beginning of the year if I don't have the opportunity for that class, and really ask them, what are times and ways that we can get together to help you build these skills and pick out a project and work together on this. And students are great in getting creative too. So, we'll do lunch meetings, we'll do, they might have a TA period, and so we're able to talk to that teacher and swap off with the teacher as far as they can come in and work on their project while maybe I'm teaching a class, but they can come use the resources and stuff and ask questions if they have them. And so getting students input on what times work best for them is really helpful in setting up schedules and just being creative and flexible with that.
Cheyenne, how about you? What are your thoughts on that?
My biggest issue with the stressors that my students face are actually just trying to get students to understand I'm willing to work with them, and I'm willing to figure out how we can overcome these stressors, because usually the first kind of wall that we hit, students think I'm not willing to work with them. They think, oh, if I can't make it on Tuesdays because I have to babysit or I have to work, I can't be on the team anymore. And I'm like, no, let's talk this out. Let's figure it out. If you need to call me Wednesday night and we work over the phone, or we work on FaceTime, let's figure this out. And just getting students to understand that these stressors don't have to mean that they can't be part of the program.
And I can't tell you how much we appreciate the extra time that all teachers are putting in, as Debbie mentioned, at lunch, after school, on weekends, to support these students. You make such a difference in their lives, and you know that they will remember your names forever. Okay, let's move on to another question. How has participating in research and research competitions impacted your students? Cheyenne, I see a lot of great pictures of your students from your competitions. Tell us a little bit about how they've been impacted.
I feel like they, even once they're done being in my program, they feel like they are still part of a team. So even if they are not friends forever, which we're talking about middle school and high schoolers, so obviously they're not friends forever, they still feel like they can count on each other and they can trust each other in class, they can trust each other outside of class. And I feel like it's the first time that students get kind of an idea of real world work environment. You know, we may not be best friends with all of our coworkers, but we need to trust our coworkers and we need to be able to work with our coworkers, and especially mimicking real world science. I feel like students get that experience by being part of it.
Yeah, that sense of belonging is so important, especially at the middle school level. It's not always easy to find your place in middle school. And so this provides something like that. You're providing that for the students, which is great. Debbie, how about you? What are your thoughts on how your students have been impacted?
I would totally echo that with Cheyenne. It's camaraderie, building that place, that niche where they can be themselves, where they can explore interests, where they can fail and still be able to be comfortable and be willing to try again. I definitely students participating in these research projects and then being able to present that builds confidence skills beyond anything or any class that they could ever do that in. And I think that's why, you know, I'm willing to spend that extra time and that extra effort into it, because once you see kids build those skills, it's like addictive. You're like, I got to help more kids feel this way. This is incredible. And so, and it opens doors for them like that they never thought possible, that they had never dreamed maybe that big before, until they see, oh wait, this can lead somewhere, this can do something. And that's why I keep doing what I do, because you see that product come from the kids' work and their willingness to try, and it opens doors.
Yeah, that's great. And I have to say that one of the unintended consequences of our advocate program is that we've seen the same thing is so important for teachers, to have that sense of camaraderie, to know other teachers who are doing the same thing that you're doing and are working in the trenches every day. And that really has been a joy for the society to see and to be able to help support. Okay, our next question, what resources have you found that have been most valuable in doing research with students? Debbie, what are your thoughts?
So I had originally, since we're on such a timeline, I just want to throw a little, what would you call it, advertisement out there for our webinars on the Science and Society in the Public page. So a lot of the lead advocates have recorded webinars to help with certain types of research and supporting students. And one of them that I put on there for me was supporting rural students. So I want to direct you to that because there's some really good resources that I posted on there. So you can spend a little more time looking at those and linking to those. But a lot of the resources in rural areas that I really like to tap into are the either like science professionals who are in the area, and usually because we're rural, that comes down to like federal government agencies like the BLM, the U.S. Forest Service. I like to tap into those, and then extension agencies through universities. Those are like prime places to like really tap into resources and make connections, because you can connect students with mentors, with scientists who can really mentor them in their specific project, because obviously as teachers we can't be experts in everything that we do. We'd like to be, but we're not. And so to find mentors to help those students is like, that's prime. That's the resources that I love, is to be able to connect kids with other students. And that's another like awesome thing about this, the advocate program too, is because you are connected to other teachers, and then they have ideas who connect you to other people and other resources and things like that. So really just reaching out and within the community to the things that are around you and playing on those strengths is vital in a rural community.
Yeah, I think that's true. And the webinars you're referring to, if folks go to our website, the Outreach and Equity Program resources have you found to be most valuable?
So besides the Society for Science, I really have to just say the GIS community around the world, and particularly in the United States, even though we are so spread out, is, you know, it feels like family. You can start talking to a GIS professional and within 5 minutes you feel like you've known them your whole life, and they are willing to do whatever your students need. So, you know, I can email a GIS professional in New York that I've never met before, but if they have something that relates to my students' projects and they know that some student in rural Oklahoma is doing something related to their field, you better believe that they are willing to help. And, you know, I've never had a GIS professional say, oh, no, I can't help or I won't help. They are just willing to step in and do whatever they can for the students, because we recognize that that's the next generation for the field, is making sure people have that experience. And, you know, this is how we create the next generation.
Yeah, and I would have to say that we were so grateful to our sponsors of the Advocate Program, Regeneron, Arconic, and Jack Kent Cook, but also I think you've been really involved in another one of our ISEF sponsors, National Geographic, runs one of the competitions that you have had your students part of. And being a geography teacher, I want to encourage other teachers who are out there who are not a traditional STEM teacher to really get involved in that GIS community and get your students to, you know, to enter the work that they're doing into these research competitions. How did you first get involved with the National Geographic? I think it's called the Geo Challenge. Is that right?
Yeah, so the very first year, they sent out an email to everyone that was on their email list saying that they were basically kind of testing out their new competition called Geo Challenge. And I had some of my students do it, and not only did they win, but they were the only team from Oklahoma to get to compete at regionals in Texas. And, you know, little team from Shawnee, Oklahoma got to be the ones that represented Oklahoma basically in Texas, and it was amazing. We spent a weekend in there. You know, we drove our school van down there and rented an Airbnb, so it was amazing, absolutely amazing.
That's great. Well done for getting your students there. I had one question for you. Some of our advocates have run into the problem of connectivity in rural areas. Have your students had difficulty getting internet connections, especially for just online learning in general? And then have you found any ways to help them get connected so that they can do their schoolwork and their science fair projects? Debbie, have you had any issues there or success in resolving that?
Yeah, we've totally, when we went into soft closure and school was dismissed, all of our students, like I said, were in the residential hall, were sent back to the reservation as they should be with their families. But that presented a whole huge issue of connectivity, being able to access internet. Some of my students live even an hour from the post office, and so being able to collect mailed information was extremely difficult. And so that's something, you know, it feels like these last 2 months have been more crisis schooling than what we really want them to be. And I think that's what this summer is going to be for a lot of teachers, including myself, is figuring out what does this look like for the future, and how do we help those students? How do we problem solve for our students that are in those situations? And for me, at least in this crisis schooling mode, it has been through the mail, and also setting up a Google Voice number where my students could text me or call me at any time and leave messages. That's been a helpful connection, just to get any connection with them and to keep them like supported in any way. But definitely for projects, there wasn't much we could do, and the fact that if the resources are here and they're hours away from us, it was really difficult. And so that's something that I think we're going to have to do a better job of addressing and figuring out how do we support those students in a more productive and effective way when we have these types of conditions.
Thank you. Yeah. How about you, Cheyenne? Have you had issues or found a way to resolve this at all for your students?
Yeah, like Debbie said, getting students to engage through just snail mail, through the mail, and some students have for the first time learned how to address an envelope, but having to mail supplies out to them. Like recently I sent out 20 agar plates so that they could take samples around their house and in pools and things like that. And also, like Debbie said, being willing to take text messages and phone calls. But the other thing is sending out blocks of information instead of basically small packets, so that when they can get cell reception or when they can get internet, they can get all of the information that I need to send at once, which is something that I'm not used to doing. We typically want to hold back and give a little bit of directions at a time, but I'm having to give all of it at once, and then I can explain it when they have questions.
Yeah, it seems a bit overwhelming, but that's what we have to do right now. I have heard of through the STEM learning ecosystem that there are a number of organizations that are providing sort of STEM packets of maybe really basic equipment to students when they are picking up their food at school. So that's another opportunity how we can reach students who maybe don't have that connectivity. Okay, it looks like we have a question from the audience here. It says, how is Indigenous scientific knowledge, for example, ethnobotany, respected and encouraged in your learning communities? Who would like to answer that first?
I can go for that.
Okay.
And then Cheyenne, I'll turn it over to you. This is something that we are finally, I think, beginning to address in our community and taking steps towards, because I love this question, because this is something that is so critical for our Native students to incorporate their cultural heritage, their learning, their understanding into their research. And so one of the things that I like to do is find scientists who come from their same backgrounds and invite them in to do a program called Snack with the Scientist. And so I'll find a scientist that is I'll just do searches for scientists that have their cultural heritage, their background, their ethnicity, whatever it is, of my groups of students, and then I'll invite that scientist in. I'll track them down. I kind of stalk them through like Twitter or Facebook, and or their university email if they're affiliated with the university, and I'll just throw it out there, and I'll be like, listen, I have these amazing kids who need to see scientists like you. They need to see role models and recognize that there are people just like them who are working in the science industry in STEM fields. And what I love is these scientists and professionals recognize that there is a need for more modeling of what they do. And so they're more than willing to get on a phone conversation, a Skype, a FaceTime interview with the kids. And as I've mentioned to a lot of colleagues before, one of my best experiences was when I had a Navajo geneticist get on and present to my students. And when her face came up big on the screen, a couple of my students gasped and were like, she looks like us. And it was the best feeling, because it's like, yeah, it's like you have this ability and you have this power to do the things that you dream of. And so I love by starting, sorry, that's a really long explanation, of bringing professionals in that have the background like my students and understand where my students are coming from.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I wanted to say that right now we do have a program, a pilot program at the Society where we are matching our alumni with teachers. So if you are interested in that, please do email us at teachers@societyforscience.org with any questions you have about this session, and we will do our very best to match you and your students with an alum from our competition.
Can I throw this out there that we totally just did that this week with that program? And our scientist, she's a university student in a STEM program, and it was fantastic because she came from a rural school as well, and she talked about her journey in doing science research and how it changed her whole path. And it was just so fantastic to have her connect with my students that live in the same type of rural area because they felt like there was hope and connection in that. So great program.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad you already got involved with that. All right, here's the next question, and Cheyenne, I think this would be a good one for you. Are there ways that the public can help who are from other communities to support rural and Native students in STEM? I know that you are now working with a nonprofit, I think. So what are some of the ways that folks can help from the outside?
I know that, usually people think donating money or donating supplies, which is awesome. And so they can always do that. But, shooting an email or calling and leaving a voicemail to the area and just saying that you're willing to help, whether that means that you're willing to do a Skype call and do a Q&A for students, or for instance, I have a student that is doing a project on shrimp and parasites in shrimp. Well, we live in Oklahoma, so we're not surrounded by shrimp, and he was not going to change his project, and he had done so much research, I could not, in good faith, talk him out of this. And so I had to start just asking people on the coast, hey, would you send me shrimp? Because we need to make sure that it's from those areas, and you can't always trust the seafood at stores to be correctly labeled. And, being that person that's willing to send samples from your geographic area or, any sort of thing like that, you have no idea until you reach out what may be needed. And it's probably something you never thought of, like shrimp from your area. But it can be super, super helpful. And it just is something that you have no idea is needed until you ask.
Wow, I never thought that shrimp would be needed, but you're absolutely right. There are things that teachers just don't have access to. So that's great advice to reach out and see what the needs of your particular area are. I have a question for both of you. Have either of you ever had students do projects that are related to their community, that are supporting their community, maybe with a need that is unique to your setting? You're thinking back through all your projects.
I've had students do several. The very first Geo Challenge project that we did was focused on mallard migration, and we do have mallard migration through here. But the one that I think was my favorite, I had a group that looked at pollution at our local lake and trying to figure out what the main pollution was and then what the cause was. And so they had to go out and do testing and gather samples and do actual field research. And, the community just absolutely loved it. And I thought it was so great because they wanted to make that change within their community.
How about you, Debbie? Any examples you can think of?
Yeah, so one that I was super excited about for this year, it unfortunately was seniors who, again, went back to the reservation and weren't able to have connectivity, and so we weren't able to finish it. But I'm hoping this next year we can continue to work through that. But their idea was they wanted to help agricultural be more sustainable and more just have more produce come out of their local gardens within their reservation. And so they had brought samples, soil samples, and we had designed this whole kind of experiment of how they were going to test for the effective kind of how different amounts of manure and the different soil types and how it could be more productive in producing the produce and stuff. And it was just excellent. The kids were so excited, and they got to learn how to do electric conductivity tests and pH testing, and it was so great to see those girls in their, their lab coats and their safety goggles and their gloves, and they're measuring out these samples of manure, and they're laughing, and they're like, this is what science is. And I was like, it is. And there's a connection when they can connect it back to their home and something that's important to them and their community. It makes it that much more powerful, and they're that much more invested in it. And so I think that's such a critical thing, to be able to draw experiments back to their backgrounds in that. And so we're excited for this coming fall and to be able to kind of pick that research up, because they actually have siblings who are younger and still in school. And so we're excited to kind of pick that back up and hopefully continue that research with that.
That's great. And that actually leads right into my next question, which is one from the audience. How can you and your students get younger students involved? Obviously, starting at a younger age is really important. So what have you tried in the past, or what advice do you have? Cheyenne, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, my biggest advice would be to invite them, whether that's to competitions or when you're doing research testing days. We also try to hold like family nights where we'll show a documentary and the students can present where they're at in their research. I have right now, I know of 2 siblings that are coming up to the middle school within the next 2 years that have already engaged and felt like they're part of the program, because they come to all of our competitions and we see them constantly. And a lot of times, if I have extra supplies laying around, I'll let them go off and do their own thing. And so, just make them feel part of it, even if maybe they can't be officially part of it yet.
How about you, Debbie?
Yeah, along with those STEM community nights, which I think are so critical in helping to build those relationships within the community and allow the families to get a chance to see what their students are doing, because often teenagers don't want to share. Their answer is school was great, it's fine. But they're doing incredible work, and so when they get the opportunity to show that off to their family and friends, that makes a difference, especially in the younger generation. And then another thing our school does is we invite the elementary, usually 4th and 5th grade, to come over, and we just do a whole day of STEM activities during the school day. And so they'll just walk over, and then my students are in charge of it, so they have to do the hands-on demonstrations, and they go through rotations. And I have found we've been doing that now for, this would have been our 4th year, and now those students are finally coming up to be the age where they're involved, and the first thing they say is things like, oh, I remember when we came over and did that. I want to do an experiment related to that. So like Cheyenne said, it's just starting when they're young and like exposing them to that and letting them see that experience and what the older students are going through and how they're enjoying that experience. That makes all the difference when the kids are of age and get involved in the program.
Thank you both. Yes, it's so important to reach those younger students, and it sounds like you're both doing a great job of that. It looks like we are about out of time, so I want to thank both of you. We've mentioned a huge number of resources in this particular symposium, so I want to encourage folks, if you're interested in the advocate program, any of these other resources, you can go to our webpage, societyforscience.org, or if you have questions, further questions for Debbie or Cheyenne, you're welcome to email them to us, and we'll pass them on to them, teachers at societyforscience.org. So thank you so much, Cheyenne and Debbie, for joining us today. All right, and everyone have a great day at Virtual Regeneron ISEF. Thank you so much.